A solar magnetic catastrophe is happening right now, and scientists are shocked by the plasma hemorrhage scale, because what is bleeding out of our sun could plunge Earth into a climate disaster that makes ice ages look like minor weather changes. Picture the massive invisible shield that protects our entire solar system suddenly developing giant holes, allowing the sun's life-giving plasma to hemorrhage into space at rates that have never been recorded in human history. We are not talking about normal solar activity, we are talking about our star literally bleeding its energy into the void, while space agencies scramble to understand why. But here is what has solar physicists in complete panic: the magnetic catastrophe is not random. Deep space observatories show the breakdown is following a pattern that suggests something fundamental is changing inside the sun's core. The plasma hemorrhage is accelerating every day, and the magnetic holes are growing larger, creating weak spots that could affect everything from our satellites to our planet's climate. The most terrifying discovery came from comparing current solar data with historical records. The last time the sun showed similar magnetic instability, Earth experienced the Little Ice Age that killed millions and collapsed entire civilizations. But this catastrophe is happening faster and more dramatically than anything scientists have ever witnessed. Is the sun entering a death spiral that could freeze our planet? Or are we watching the birth of solar changes so extreme they could make Earth uninhabitable for all life as we know it? December 21st, 2025. Winter solstice. Solar physicists monitoring the sun through NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory identify something that should not be there. The 193 angstrom filter, calibrated to observe the sun's corona at extreme ultraviolet wavelengths, reveals a massive dark region stretching across the solar surface. This is a coronal hole, an area where the sun's outermost atmosphere appears to have vanished, leaving a void that exposes deeper layers of our star. The visual is stark and unmistakable. Where the corona normally glows brilliantly in the filtered imagery, this section appears almost black, a gigantic wound in the sun's magnetic structure. The darkness does not indicate absence of the sun itself, but rather the absence of high-temperature plasma that typically fills the corona. Scientists are actually seeing deeper into the sun than normal, looking through layers usually obscured by dense coronal material. The scale puts this coronal hole among the largest ever documented in the 21st century, ranking in the top 5 to top 20, depending on measurement criteria. But size alone does not capture the full danger. This coronal hole occupies a transquatorial position, slicing directly through the sun's ecliptic plane. That geometric detail carries enormous implications for Earth. When coronal holes form in polar regions, their plasma streams miss our planet entirely. This one sits in perfect alignment, aimed directly at Earth. Even more alarming, space weather stations suspect this may be the same coronal hole observed in March 2025. If true, it has persisted for approximately 18 complete solar rotations, defying standard models of coronal hole behavior. Current measurements reveal the immediate threat. Solar wind velocity has risen to 682 kilometers per second, nearly double the normal baseline of 300 to 500 kilometers per second. This is before the main high-speed stream even arrives. Earth sits directly in its path, with no way to avoid what is coming. Understanding what is happening requires understanding the sun's normal behavior. And right now, nothing about this situation qualifies as normal. The sun operates on a magnetic cycle spanning 8 to 13 years, averaging around 12 years per complete cycle. During this period, the sun's magnetic field undergoes a complete polarity flip. North becomes south, south becomes north. A cosmic reorganization driving virtually all solar activity, and the magnetic cycle governs that change. We are currently at the very end of solar maximum, entering the descending phase. Solar maximum represents the most chaotic period when the magnetic field reaches peak disorder. There is no clear polarity because the sun sits in the middle of flipping, creating conditions for intense solar flares, coronal mass ejections, and general magnetic turbulence. Solar maximum is the peak of that chaos. Coronal holes follow predictable patterns tied to the solar cycle. They become more frequent and grow larger during the descending phase, and solar minimum when the sun's magnetic field establishes a clear new polarity. During solar minimum, coronal holes typically appear in polar regions, oriented perpendicular to Earth's orbital plane. Their streams do not impact our planet. Coronal holes usually follow that cycle. What we are witnessing in 2025 defies this pattern completely. We are seeing massive coronal holes during solar maximum, the phase when they should be smallest and rarest. Multiple gigantic coronal holes have appeared this year, and the current formation is the latest in this unprecedented lineage. The positioning makes the anomaly worse. These are not appearing in polar regions. They are cutting through transquatorial zones, positioned to directly blast Earth. Transquatorial placement is what makes this so alarming. Wrong timing, wrong size, wrong location. Solar physicists confront an uncomfortable question. If we are already seeing this magnitude during solar maximum, what happens during the descending phase and solar minimum when coronal holes are supposed to get bigger? The sun could be shedding even more plasma during periods when Earth should experience relative calm. Physicists are now racing to understand the implications. Something fundamental about this solar cycle is operating outside expected parameters. Scientists lack answers to explain why. This behavior breaks the rulebook for what we expect from the sun, and it raises urgent unanswered questions about near-term risks to Earth. To understand the danger, you need to understand the mechanism. A coronal hole forms when the sun's magnetic field splits open in a way that fundamentally changes how plasma behaves. Normally, magnetic field lines on the sun loop back into the solar surface, containing the superheated plasma within the corona. In a coronal hole, those magnetic field lines do not loop back. They break open and extend straight out into interplanetary space, creating what scientists call an open magnetic field structure. This open configuration changes everything. Instead of containing plasma, the magnetic field actively shuttles that plasma away from the sun, accelerating it into high-speed streams that blast outward through the solar system. The bigger the coronal hole, the more plasma is accelerated, and the more strongly Earth becomes embedded in that unique magnetic field structure emanating from our star. The sun dominates our solar system in ways most people fundamentally underestimate. It contains 99.86% of all the mass in the entire solar system. Everything else, the planets, moons, asteroids, comets, and dust, comprises less than 1/7 of 1%. That gravitational and magnetic dominance means the sun's influence over Earth is overwhelming and inescapable. Solar wind flows constantly from the sun in all directions, creating what is called the heliosphere, a bubble of solar influence extending far beyond Pluto. During a coronal hole high-speed stream impact, Earth does not just experience ambient solar wind. Earth connects directly to the open magnetic field structure of the coronal hole itself. At one astronomical unit, roughly 93 million miles from the sun, Earth orbits close enough that these direct connections happen rapidly and intensely. The magnetic field lines extending from the coronal hole curve outward as the sun rotates, eventually intersecting Earth's orbit and our magnetosphere. When that connection occurs, our planet becomes embedded in a focused stream of accelerated plasma, traveling at velocities that dwarf normal solar wind speeds. This is the sun hemorrhaging plasma directly into space. Earth sits downstream from the wound, embedded in the outflow with no way to avoid what is coming. The connection between coronal holes and earthquakes is one of the most controversial topics in geophysics. Mainstream science largely refuses to acknowledge this correlation. Despite mounting evidence, the pattern is undeniable. The biggest earthquakes consistently occur after high-speed stream impacts from giant coronal holes. Historical earthquake records reveal patterns that conventional plate tectonics struggles to explain. The largest earthquakes on record occurred when gigantic coronal holes dominated the sun's surface, blasting Earth with sustained plasma streams that correlate with massive seismic energy release. The mechanism remains debated, but the temporal correlation exists regardless of whether models can explain it. The year 2025 provides compelling real-time evidence. This year ranks as one of the strongest for seismic activity ever recorded. A magnitude 8.8 megaquake struck earlier this year, releasing enormous energy. Beyond that, 2025 has produced numerous magnitude 7 earthquakes, creating cumulative seismic energy rivaling the most active years in history. Only 5 years in recorded history have experienced magnitude 9 or larger earthquakes. The year 1906 stands out as particularly catastrophic. Yet when total seismic energy is calculated, 1906 barely exceeds 2025, despite lacking modern monitoring technology. March 2025 provides the clearest example. A coronal hole similar to the current formation rotated into position in late March. On March 29th, days after the high-speed stream arrival, a magnitude 7.7 earthquake struck Myanmar, Burma, and Thailand. The entire region experienced violent shaking across multiple countries. Concurrent events make the correlation more intriguing. At the exact time, Venus and Mercury aligned in inferior conjunction, positioning both planets directly between Earth and the Sun. December 2025 shows a remarkably similar configuration. Venus and Mars approach superior conjunction on the Sun's far side, the first time in 6.6 years. This occurs every 2,338 days, creating repeating cycles. Some researchers believe influence solar activity. The pattern suggests the incoming high-speed stream could trigger seismic events. Mainstream science dismisses the connection, but the evidence continues mounting with each solar rotation. Beyond the seismic threat lies another danger meteorologists consistently fail to acknowledge: the connection between coronal hole high-speed streams and extreme weather intensification. Research demonstrates clear links between these solar events and violent atmospheric phenomena, particularly tornadoes and cyclones. Yet 99% of weather forecasters remain completely ignorant of space weather's influence on Earth's atmosphere. The mechanism centers on vorticity, the tendency of air to rotate, the primary ingredient for tornado and cyclone formation. Coronal hole high-speed stream impacts increase atmospheric vorticity through processes involving the global electric circuit. During certain times of year when conditions already favor rotation, this space weather forcing becomes a significant amplification factor. The year 2025 set records for tornado activity across the United States. The correlation with coronal hole activity is impossible to ignore. A massive coronal hole, similar to the current formation, impacted Earth in late March. Within days, early April brought a catastrophic tornado outbreak that shattered previous records for severity and geographic extent. Water and ice crystals in storm systems carry substantial electromagnetic charge. Thunderstorms can contain 100 million watts of potential electrical energy. Even rainstorms without lightning possess significant electromagnetic components, making them highly responsive to changes in the global electric circuit. Current California weather forecasts predict heavy rain and flood watches for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. The coronal hole high-speed stream impact is expected on Monday or Tuesday. The timing creates dangerous convergence, where space weather will likely amplify an already significant weather system. Forecasters consistently underestimate storm intensity because they do not account for space weather effects. The rule is simple: whatever the forecast predicts, expect more. California faces significant rainfall already. The incoming coronal hole impact will make it worse, and mainstream meteorology remains blind to the connection. Emergency management officials prepare for flooding based on models that ignore half the equation. Weather prediction centers issue warnings calculated without space weather variables. The result is systematic underestimation of storm severity during periods when Earth sits embedded in high-speed solar wind streams. Communities face dangers they have not been adequately warned about. The most troubling aspect is not what scientists know. It is what they do not know and refuse to admit. NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory has provided unprecedented views of the Sun, but that does not translate to a century of continuous data. We are working with a limited historical baseline, which makes definitive statements about normal versus abnormal nearly impossible. The first quality images of coronal holes came from Skylab in 1973, just over 50 years ago. Before that, scientists had no visual evidence that these structures existed. The observational record is not continuous. Gaps exist where monitoring was offline or limited. Trying to establish typical coronal hole behavior from such a short data set is like understanding ocean currents from watching waves for an afternoon. This coronal hole is definitely abnormal compared to what is typically observed. But typical monitoring only encompasses a few decades of observations. The persistence represents another anomaly that models struggle to explain. Normal coronal holes close after a few rotations as the magnetic field reorganizes. Current holes persist for 5, 10, even 15 rotations. That is bizarre by any standard. This entire solar cycle has exhibited weird characteristics that physicists quietly acknowledge in technical papers, while publicly maintaining everything is normal. What happens when coronal holes do not close? What happens when they persist rotation after rotation, continuously hemorrhaging plasma into space? How do gigantic coronal holes affect solar dynamics when they persist for months? How does the open magnetic field constantly emitting into space affect Earth? Continuously emitting plasma raises serious questions. These questions lack satisfactory answers. NASA's institutional overconfidence presents a fundamental problem. The "we know everything" attitude permeates communications, even as data reveals phenomena that models never predicted. Advanced climate models failed to predict current coronal hole intensity during solar maximum. Simulations suggested these conditions should not occur until 2040. The models were wrong. One of the largest coronal holes of the 21st century is blasting plasma directly at Earth. Geomagnetic storms already impact our planet. Earthquake patterns for 2025 show record-breaking seismic energy. Weather systems intensify beyond forecasts. Planetary alignments echo configurations from earlier major seismic events. Scientists cannot fully explain the persistence, intensity, or timing. We enter uncharted territory with a star we thought we understood. If the descending phase and solar minimum make these holes bigger as patterns suggest, what is coming? Normal expectations say the descending phase should bring larger, more persistent coronal holes. But those should appear in polar regions, missing Earth entirely. Current patterns show transquatorial positioning. If this anomalous positioning continues into the descending phase, coronal holes could become even larger while continuing to blast Earth directly for extended periods. No respite during what should be quiet solar periods. The cascading impacts threaten every aspect of modern civilization. Power grids face vulnerability from sustained geomagnetic storms that strain electrical infrastructure beyond design limits. Communication satellites endure prolonged plasma bombardment that degrades systems and shortens operational lifespans. GPS navigation becomes increasingly unreliable as ionospheric disturbances corrupt satellite signals. The aviation industry confronts radiation exposure concerns for polar routes as cosmic ray protection from the sun's magnetic field weakens. Climate implications extend beyond immediate weather amplification. The last time the sun showed similar magnetic instability, Earth experienced the Little Ice Age. a period that killed millions and reshaped entire civilizations. Current collapse is happening faster and more dramatically than that historical event. If sustained plasma loss continues, reduced solar output could affect Earth's climate in ways climate models have never adequately considered. Economic consequences multiply across every sector. Economic disruption in agriculture, from extreme weather intensification, threatens food security. Infrastructure damage from increased seismic activity strains emergency response capabilities and reconstruction budgets. Technology sector vulnerability to electromagnetic events could trigger cascading failures across interconnected global systems. The scientific community faces paralysis. There is a lack of adequate models for current behavior. There is no historical precedent at this scale with modern monitoring. Scientists are unable to predict what comes next with any confidence. The high-speed stream approaches Earth now. Geomagnetic storm watches are already issued. The next few days will test whether correlations hold. Each solar rotation brings potential for renewed impact. Are we witnessing rare but normal solar behavior? Or has the Sun entered a phase that could fundamentally alter Earth's systems? Questions remain unanswered as our planet sits embedded in the solar wind, downstream from a star that refuses to behave according to the rules we thought governed its existence. One of the largest coronal holes of the 21st century is positioned to directly impact Earth. The plasma hemorrhage continues. The magnetic field structure remains wide open, actively shuttling billions of tons of superheated material into interplanetary space at velocities approaching 700 kilometers per second. Three converging threats demand immediate attention. Seismic danger from correlations that mainstream science refuses to acknowledge, but historical patterns continue to validate. Extreme weather amplification, as space weather forces interact with atmospheric systems in ways meteorologists systematically ignore. Cascading infrastructure failures as power grids, communication networks, and navigation systems face sustained assault from conditions they were never designed to withstand. The scientific uncertainty creates the most alarming aspect of this crisis. Experts cannot fully explain the persistence, intensity, or timing of what is happening. Models predicted these conditions should not occur until 2040. The observations prove the models wrong. We are witnessing solar behavior that defies fundamental assumptions about how our star operates. Civilizations collapsed. Agricultural systems failed across entire continents, but that event unfolded over decades. Current solar magnetic breakdown is happening faster and more dramatically than anything in recorded history. A high-speed stream is approaching Earth right now. Geomagnetic storm watches have already been issued. Satellite operators are preparing for plasma bombardment. Power grid managers are monitoring fluctuations. Seismologists are watching fault systems with growing concern. Weather forecasters are issuing predictions that may prove too conservative because they ignore half the variables affecting storm intensity. A larger mystery looms over everything. If this is happening during solar maximum, when coronal holes should be smallest and rarest, what happens when we reach the phase where they naturally grow larger? The descending phase will follow, and then solar minimum. Standard patterns suggest conditions could intensify. Something fundamental about this solar cycle is operating outside expected parameters. We are watching our star behave in ways that challenge decades of solar physics research. Earth sits embedded in the plasma outflow with no way to avoid what is coming. The Sun continues hemorrhaging its magnetic field into space. Questions remain unanswered. We are entering uncharted territory with a star we thought we understood.